The Humours, From Ancient to Modern Personality Theory. Professor Michael Botwin, Department of Psychology, California State University, Fresno. The humours were the original way of talking about personality traits and characteristics. They go back to the ancient Greek times. However, it's a theory that has stayed around until the mid-1800s when the philosopher Immanuel Kant wrote about them in his treatise on the world called Anthropology. A similar theory was later developed by Hans Eysenck, a German-born English psychologist who spent his career working at the University of London. In this presentation, I'm going to talk about the humours and bring you through why the Greeks and later ancients thought they were important. We'll also focus on some of the pop culture that still remains associated with the humours. In fact, if you've ever said someone was full of something, this is the lecture where you'll find out where that originated from. So let's take a look at the ancient Greek theory of the humours. The ancient Greeks were in search of something called the physis. And the physis was the thing that was the basic building block of the entire universe. Modern physicists, whether they talk about a theory of one or a theory of everything, are still engaged in this quest. Now, modern physicists will on occasion tell me that eventually all behavior will be able to be explained in molecular relationships, and we won't need psychologists anymore. Well, I'm pretty sure that's not going to be true for quite a while. So I think it's important that we start talking and looking at some of these ideas. Now, Thales comes up with the idea that the physis is water. Heraclitus later comes around and says it's fire. Much later, Empedocles comes along and says the universe consists of four physes, or four basic substances: earth, water, air, and fire, the four elements. Now, these have been immortalized in our pop culture in a variety of ways. The 1970s and 80s R&B band, Earth, Wind, and Fire, were only missing water in terms of their using the name of the elements. Here's one of their album covers showing again the three of the four physes they used. One of my favorite science fiction movies, The Fifth Element, shows the notion and the relationship between the four elements and a extremely sophisticated entity, the fifth element. You may have somewhere in your closet an element t-shirt or other kind of piece of apparel. These element shirts have the four elements on them: earth, water, air, and fire. And I bet that you didn't get the lecture that my kids got on the element shirts when they got the t-shirt. Back to Empedocles. Empedocles says that the human body also consists of the four basic elements. So earth are the solid parts of the body, water the liquids, air the breath of life, which also becomes psyche, the name of our field, and fire for reasoning ability. And think of all the times you've heard examples of these in modern times. someone who's down to earth, someone who can't hold their water, someone full of hot air, someone on fire with an idea. These have become part of our common parlance. Well, Hippocrates comes along next, and Hippocrates was a healer and one of the first physicians. He believed the body naturally healed itself and diagnosed and attempted to cure both mental and physical disorders. He attacked supernatural medicine in favor of more scientific investigations of medicine. And you probably know Hippocrates most from his oath, and the short part of his oath is, "First, do no harm." Well, what Hippocrates attempted to show was that when the balance of the body was perfect, all of the humors were balanced and people behaved well. When there is an imbalance of the humors in the system, in a body, that's when someone has either mental or physical problems. Galen, one of the also first doctors out there, brings it even to the fore, and he says these four basic elements are what make our personality, and that there are four temperaments. Now, the temperaments are sometimes also called humors. I'll use those words interchangeably in this presentation. So the four humors are phlegmatic, melancholic, sanguine, and choleric. And I will talk about each one of these briefly in turn. So let's start with these sanguine people. If you have a preponderance of blood in your body, more than the other three elements, you are probably sanguine. The element is air. Now, the ancients believed that each of the humors had a location physically in the body. So sanguine people have a preponderance of liver. They have qualities of being hot and moist. I'll talk about those in a little while. They relate to a bigger view of the elements. And they also believe that body type came into play, and complexion. So sanguine or happy-go-lucky people are red-cheeked, and they can be corpulent. Now, corpulent is an old word for overweight. Here are a series of personality descriptive words for sanguine people. They're amorous, happy, generous, optimistic, boisterous, bubbly, chatty, overly emotional, and they're social extroverts. Kind of someone you'd like to hang out at a party with, right? Well, the second type is choleric. Choleric is yellow bile. Now, yellow bile does not exist in the body, but the ancients saw it in decaying bodies and assumed that it was also in living bodies. Choleric people have a preponderance of fire. The bodily organ associated with cholerics are spleens. You've ever heard someone who's angry talking about having to vent their spleen. This goes back to the ancient Greeks. Their qualities are hot and dry. Complexion-wise, they're red-haired and thin. If you remember your Shakespeare, in Julius Caesar, there is a line that fits this. Beware of Cassius. He has a thin and sallow look. Well, how do our choleric folks behave? They tend to be alphas, proud and hot-blooded. You might have heard that as a term, hot-blooded. They're brash, domineering, overbearing, extroverted, violent, vengeful, short-tempered, and ambitious. They're kind of intense folks. as contrasted with our next type, the phlegmatics. Now, phlegmatic is associated with phlegm. And if you've ever had a bad cold or sinuses or asthma or something where your lungs are incapacitated, think about pneumonia where your lungs are full of things. The element is water or phlegm. The organ is the lungs. Phlegmatic people are cold and moist, and again, they're corpulent. It's just not one type that has a corner on being corpulent. Phlegmatic people, they're kind of pleasers. They're meek, they're submissive, they're introverts, they like to please other people. They have a hard time saying no. However, they're very trustworthy. They can be indecisive, and they're also calm. They're good listeners, and they don't like to hurt other people. Now, our final personality type, melancholy, black bile, another substance that the ancients thought lived in living bodies but doesn't. Melancholic people are earthy people. The organ is the gallbladder. They're cold and dry, and again sallow and thin. Melancholy is probably the one that we see most directly in modern psychology. For those of you interested in clinical psychology, you know that depression, which can be called melancholy, is probably the most garden variety mental illness out there. Well, let's look at the melancholic personality. They tend to be emotional, sensitive, perfectionistic. They're introverts, self-deprecating, but they don't give up. They're tenacious. They don't let go of things. They're pessimistic, complain a lot. They're introspective but sentimental. And think of all the different ways we talk about these ancient personality types to this day. The Christian burial service talks about ashes to ashes, dust to dust. We use the color black to denote depression. We wear it when we mourn. It also is just become associated with melancholy and depression. Winston Churchill was a very famous depressive, and he stated many times that if he felt a bout of depression coming on, it was like a black cloud coming over his head. So there you have it, the 4 basic personality types that go back to the early hundreds in Greece and stay with us to relatively modern times. But how do they fit in with the rest of the world and the cosmos? Well, I called some of the material in the next section from this book that I just love to death. It's a beautiful book, and it's a fascinating book. It is written by Jack Hartnell, and it's called Medieval Bodies. And they go through the body and describe the body as the ancients saw each of the major bodily organs. We don't have time to get into the details of Hartnell's thesis, but he does a really good job, and this is a fantastic book. So, he talks about the humors in a broader sense, and I knew some of this before, but when I found this book, found out some more substantial detail. So, the humors represent the 4 basic elements in the body. And this says simply that we're part of broader nature. If the whole universe consists of these 4 elements, and we do too, we're part of the universe. If you remember our early discussions on Greek philosophers, the Greek philosophers in earliest times were known as cosmologists. They were seeking answers to the cosmos. So the humours place bodily functions in tune with the rest of the universe, and we're just part of the substances of the larger universe. The human form, or body, is a group of what the ancients called an open and porous system that fit in with the broader world. They didn't see us as being separate from the rest of the universe. Rather, we're an integral part. So if we understand how the body is immersed in the broader cosmos, we can understand better how the body functions. And the humours are a direct reflection of the elements that the individual consists of. And the ancients make this point that it's both psychological and physical. And it's determined by an equilibrium of having all of these elements inside of your body. If you look at many theories in psychology, equilibrium is very important, whether you're talking about Freudian theory and keeping the psyche in equilibrium, ancient Greeks, or even more modern thinkers like William James and McDougall. If you're out of line, you've lost your equilibrium, you could have illness, can even die. Think about the word we use for being sick today, dis-ease. It's not being at ease with the elements in your body. And the ancient philosophers and physicians thought the most important thing that individuals could do was to correct that imbalance or prevent it from happening. Now here's where you get ideas that we find extremely strange in modern times. For example, an excess of an element could be corrected by purging the body or drawing out the excess. If you've ever wondered why the ancients used the medical practice of bleeding someone or bloodletting, this now kind of makes more sense, right? You have too much blood in your system, you have to let some of it out. Now, we realize this is a quack idea in modern times, but if you see humans as having these four humours, or these four elements in their bodies, and something's out of whack and you want to correct that balance, well, not a bad guess. Now, the ancients also related the humours to the elements of, the ancients also related the elements to each season of the year. So spring is air, summer is fire, autumn is earth, and winter is water. The humours were also related to human development. For example, old age is viewed as a cooling of the body. And when in your younger times, you're a hot and fiery young person. Now, if we're part of the cosmos, how else can the cosmos affect us? And the ancients believed that the elements were related also to things like astrology. Since we're part of the cosmos, the movement in stars of planets through the cosmos can affect our behavior according to ancient philosophers. So for the ancients, understanding the human body was just part of one attempt to make sense of the broader universe. And you find that you get a very complex view of the human as part of a broader world. and that we're massively intertwined systems of organisms floating through time and space. Now, here is an ancient diagram from a 12th century book that's been reproduced in the medieval mind. And it's quite fascinating because it shows a human, their humors, and the context of the broader universe. So here we have, to start with, the four basic humors in Latin: terra, aqua, air, and ignis. And also, if you look around the edge on that green border, you get the months of the year and the astrological signs. Now, also note that if you look here, you see that, the Latin names for the four cardinal dimensions also can spell out Adam. So you have some biblical implications there as well. So astrology to the ancients was useful because the planets affected the elements inside a human body. In fact, modern astrologers still look at these ideas, and you can find many websites where the modern astrologers look at the humors. Here are a couple of them. They make some nice pictures. Here's one where you can see the four types. Here's a modern one. It shows you the seasons of the year related to each of the four elements. You see the solstice and the equinoxes in here. The fire elements, the air elements, the earth and water elements. I like this one just because it kind of looks medieval, even though it's not. And here is a Gary Larson cartoon that gets at his four basic personality types. One person says the glass is half full. The second says the glass is half empty. The third person kind of doesn't get the question. And the fourth person retorts with, "Hey, I ordered a cheeseburger." My kids, when I showed them this when they were little, thought it was extremely amusing. Now let's bring this up to date. In modern times, starting around 1948, when he started theorizing and writing on personality, Hans Eysenck developed a model personality. Each one of the modern traits, in his view, have a biological basis. His theory was first developed in the 40s and is considered one of the major models of personality. In Eysenck's system, which in personality class we'll talk about in considerable detail, we have three main traits or dimensions: extroversion versus introversion, neuroticism versus stability, and psychoticism versus stability. And it's not shown in this two-dimensional picture I'm going to show you next. No psychoticism here. So here you see a picture from one of Eysenck's books. It shows emotionally unstable people are either emotionally unstable and introverted, who are the melancholics, or they're emotionally unstable and extroverted. They're the choleric, angry types. If you are very emotionally stable and introverted, you're a phlegmatic person. If you're very emotionally stable and extroverted, you're the sanguine or happy person. So, looking at that map there, you see the quadrants formed by the vectors of each trait map onto this ancient model. I think it's very cool that you find a continuum from the ancient Greeks with Empedocles and Galen all the way through Eysenck and his personality theorist colleagues in the 20th century. So we have this nice continuum here. I'm giving you a link because for copyright reasons I can't embed this. Since you've been kind enough to listen to me go on for over 20 minutes on the humors, you may as well get some other kind of humor without the U, plain old humor. And if you click on this link, you will go to NBC's website, National Broadcasting Company. Old sketch, which is now getting kind of ancient in and of itself, by Steve Martin and the original cast of Saturday Night Live, where Steve Martin plays a barber who does surgery, which was common in ancient days, called Theodoric of York, where they actually talk about the humors and things like that. It's a little bit kind of gory. It's a little bit crass, as you would imagine it could be from the early Saturday Night Live. But it's very, very funny and amusing. So that's your reward for listening to me. You can click on here and listen to Steve Martin and the Saturday Night Live cast. Now, in closing, modern theorists don't include things like astrology and astrological signs into their systems of personality. But modern personality psychologists are very aware of the importance of the broader situations that affect someone's personality, which is something that we'll talk about considerably in the personality course. How does your personality interact with the environment? It's a very important notion. Extroverts and introverts going into the same environment, for example, are going to behave radically different. So, you've humored me. Sorry about the bad puns. Thank you for listening in. We'll see you next time. Bye now. This has been a We Have Couches video production. Copyright 2020. Professor Michael Botwin. All rights reserved.